thanks for being here. It sounded like there were a lot more people out here when we were back there, but
They're out there.
but we do appreciate it, and I think you'll find it worthwhile. I want to welcome you to the part of the program where what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. We hope you'll take some of this back with you to your colleagues and your companies, and maybe even the companies you're going to start, because these guys really know their stuff. I'm excited to get started, and I think I'll just jump right in. One of the things I've been thinking about is you cannot turn around without reading about or hearing about big data. I can almost, hear the eyes rolling as that term comes out. And I'm wondering about whether there's a way to separate the hype from the reality, and even whether the term big data is maybe past its prime. I'm hoping you guys have some thoughts on that.
Well, I'm curious, what does the audience think? I mean, how many of you guys would say you work with big data? So it seems like people are using it.
Are they using big data or using the term big data?
Well, I'm curious, so I always wonder, where something becomes big data. When I started Crowdflower, people would talk to me about big data, and it would usually mean hundreds of millions or billions of records that we would try to clean up. And I feel like lately we've seen our customers start to say, oh man, I have big data because I can't easily open it in Excel. I have 50,000 rows of data, and it feels a little funny, but I suppose if it's hard for folks to work with, then it's a real thing that needs tools and needs solutions.
I think big data is a function of several things. It's a function of the size, which is one thing that people think about with big data, but it's also tying together multiple channels of data. So you're tying together, in for example, the B2B marketing world, you're tying together your web data with your CRM data, with your call center data, with your bookings data, and you're trying to make assumptions and look at insights across these different channels. So it's not just about the size of the data, but being able to correlate it across all these different disparate functions that we have going on in the world.
Yeah, I also think today, we're still, we're probably about 10 years into kind of the infrastructure investment and building phase, and I think it is important to have a way to describe these newer technologies that are really helping people manage these disparate sources of data, the large volumes of data, all the things that you guys just talked about. I do think eventually it becomes data. I think that this notion that only the good decisions and only the real insight is buried in enormous amounts of data is really false. And so I think that over time, the distinctions between a spreadsheet and some giant database somewhere, they don't go away from a technical standpoint, but they certainly go away from, I think, a business strategy standpoint.
And I think the biggest advancement of our time that we have with big data right now is storing data in its rawest form. So we used to have to store things in structured tables, and now what big data allows us to do is not have to create these tables of here's the search terms and here's the page and separate all the data out, because when you do that, then you try to analyze the data, you lose all the relationships between it. But we're in a world where we have things like natural language processing, where we can actually create structure from the unstructured. And we can keep it in its rawest form to ask any question later we could ever want to ask. And I think that's really the advancement in big data. So it's not even the size, and it's not even the technologies that are sitting on top of it, but it's what we can do with it and the ability to store it so that we can pull it back and get the answers we want when we want them.
I think some of that touches on another thought that I've read about, which is that big data is a technology in a sense that's going through the same evolution that all technologies go through. For instance, when the very first PC came out, visionaries were very excited. Wow, a whole computer you can put on your desk. And a lot of other people were like, yeah, great, but what does it do? And then there were spreadsheets and word processors. Then came the internet, and everybody thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And so maybe big data, we have the tools, the processing, the unstructured data, and the ability to use that. Does that make sense? Are we in some similar sort of arc?
Yeah, I think, look, Gartner talks about this all the time, the hype cycle for technology. I think that's absolutely a real thing. I actually read an article a couple days ago that compared big data and the rush to invest in big data initiatives to when essentially the web came online, where everybody said, hey, I have to have a website.
Right.
I just have to. There's a box I have to check. The CEO ran around and said, where's our website? Where's our website? without a thoughtful strategy, without a thoughtful business purpose, without really any idea as to how it was going to fit into the overall operations of a business, and also the strategic implications of having another place where you could interact with your consumers. And I think big data is very much going through the same thing. Lots of investment, lots of operational and organizational stress around big data initiatives, a little dissatisfaction, maybe growing dissatisfaction, tremendous value, I think both realized, but also there's still a big promise. But I don't think big data as a sort of a broad initiative or a broad category has made the leap yet to thinking more about solving business problems and less about all the cool things that we have to buy and organize around big data.
Oh man, I totally disagree. I like completely disagree with that. So, you know, we work with lots of data teams, and it's amazing how fast stuff has changed. So, like 4 years ago, eBay threw out most of its user data. Like it would just delete the user data because it couldn't afford to store it. And now it's like laughable with any of our e-commerce customers to delete any of the data they have because they can connect the dots just directly to revenue. Like when you actually track all the things that users do on your site, you can put better products in front of them. You can give them better search results, and that's just so clearly tied to revenue, which I think why you see so much investment in it.
And you know, as I said, there's certainly people that are realizing the value. I think e-commerce, online advertising. My background, kind of before I was doing narrative science, I worked at DoubleClick for a number of years. Those are industries who've really benefited, I think, and have been early beneficiaries. You go to financial services, you go to healthcare, you go to supply chain, you go to government. It is a very different story. You've got an enormous amount of unrealized investment and a huge promise, but a lot of work left to do.
If you look at the investors who are investing in this space right now, 5 years ago, people were investing in the back-end technologies, and you were hearing things like the Hadoops of the world and all the big data technologies. But today, it's all about the applications. How do we use this data to drive a business need and drive something forward, and how to use it to get measurable impact? And I think we are just hitting the cusp of what is about to hit us on what data can do. In every industry, every vertical, every sector is going to be disrupted. I mean, not even just digital, what we're used to thinking in enterprise, but everything from like healthcare, where we can predict you have a disease before you even show you have any signs. We're tracking everything that's happening on the ocean floor. We're tracking everything everywhere. And data is going to change everything that we do. In every industry, every vertical is going to be disrupted. And I think that we really are moving to a world of expecting more and expecting results and measurable results. Whereas before it was we get excited about, oh, this technology can store it and process it faster and do this, but where's the value? And I think that's what you're saying. But I think today is a different world, and I'm really excited to see what's going to come.
Well, this is kind of triggering my big data anxiety. I mean, because I always like put it in terms of I've got 20,000 photos on my iPhoto, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with how to get rid of the ones I don't want. It's just too much. And I know you guys are experts, so it's you don't even break a sweat. But it seems like a very difficult proposition to figure out not only what questions do I want to answer, but what are the tools I use to do that? I got people calling me every day like, hey, I've got the tool for you. Well, probably sending email. But anyway, how do you sift through all these tools and vendors, frankly, to figure out what to do?
Well, I'll say, I mean, I actually did a series of blog posts on this, which are on the Crowdflower blog, trying to list all the vendors that we see our customers using. So, you know, we sell mainly to data science teams. So we actually just asked them, you know, what tools are you using? And the funny thing was, the one tool that everybody uses on all data science teams everywhere is Excel. You know, just okay. So that's still like a really important tool.
We don't use it.
You really? Never?
I do.
I would say, I think it was over 90% of the data scientists we asked used it, but we also saw a really wide diversity of tools. I think my view is that you have, like you were saying, great infrastructural tools that got a lot of investment. Like the databases are out there that work super well. And I think there's a lot of BI tools. I think there's a lot of investment in that. I kind of wonder about the space in between that like connects your database where it's really easy to store tons and tons of unstructured information. And then like how do you get that into your BI tool? I think that's where people are spending most of their time, like the data practitioners. And so I sort of expect that that's where we'll see a lot of tools and investment in the future.
And I think we can see a lot of tools, like if you think about, I particularly focus, Sixth Sense is a predictive intelligence engine for sales and marketing. So we know who's going to buy, what they're going to buy, when they're going to buy, and how much. And when we look at it from an enterprise marketing sales perspective, if you think about it, you have 1,800, like Scott Brinker says, there's 1,800 marketing technology vendors that you can look at. That's just marketing tech, not even thinking about customer support or sales. The world that we're moving to is a world where we can tie all these systems together. Imagine a world where you have your marketing automation, your CRM, your content management, your personalization, your ad tech, your DMP, following your customer across the life cycle so you can see them and you know what action, who's going to buy, when they're going to buy, what they're going to buy, how much they're going to buy, so you can message to them with the right message in the right channel to have the optimal end experience. And at the end of the day, that's all you want. You don't want these tools and technologies. You just want to find buyers, and you want to reach them, and you want to message to them in a way that they can relate and come into you, and actually you have the best chance of winning and dominating your market. So I think the thing that we need to expect and ask from tools going into the future is those that actually are not just myopically looking into one channel and helping you with search engine optimization or helping you with personalization, but how can they follow your full customer across the life cycle, across all the keys and all the channels that they have. That's the future where we're going with data. And then creating structure from unstructured and tying all this together.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree with a lot of what Amanda just said. I also think that it's not really one size fits all, right? So if you think about how we've given people tools in the workplace today, maybe it started with analysts, now they're called data scientists. We're trying to make those tools available to everybody. I just was actually with a very large insurance company a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me they just bought 4,000 seats for a very large visualization tool to give to their field salespeople so that their salespeople could look at relevant data in sort of a consistent way, right? And they were going to adopt this enterprise-wide. My reaction to that is ridiculous. That is ludicrous, right? So I'm a CEO, and I want my salespeople out selling. I don't want my salespeople building dashboards and building pretty charts and graphs and sending that stuff along through the enterprise. I want them to have just the information they need, Amanda, as you were saying, when they need it. And so when you think about emerging technologies, and frankly, the tools just have to get a lot better. I think they're for a typical enterprise employee, to give them what essentially is a modern day pick and shovel, give them access to enormous amounts of data, and then say, best of luck, best wishes, go find something important, interesting, relevant that can change our business. That's insane. That is not going to work. I think you have to give different employees different access to different tools at the right time. So Narrative Science, which is the company that I run, we've developed what we call an advanced natural language generation platform. Takes data, figures out what's important and interesting, and presents that in a natural language document. That's just one technology. I think many other are coming, and they need to actually pull all the tools away from the typical enterprise employee and just let them do their jobs.
But it strikes me that you just hit on maybe what's my worry about using this term big data and all that. That, I mean, isn't it almost a necessity that everyone throughout the enterprise has the data in a form they can use when they need it without going through analysts and data scientists and all that? And I mean, who's going to make that happen besides you guys, of course?
I would say no. They don't. They don't need data. Employees don't need data. Employees. They need the insight. Well, they do. They need the insight, but the insight's very different than the data. And so I think you need to give them. The insight. I think you need to evolve the front end. Today the front end is Viz. Viz is very helpful, but it's just yet another tool. It's another thing that somebody has to figure out. Somebody has to analyze. And so we need to figure out, and I think we have, frankly, ways to get people information and insight that they need without necessarily giving them all of the data.
Well, I think those tools that are successful, they take the complexity and they make it very simple. And sales is the best example because sales wants simple. They don't want you to give you all the information of everything the prospect did that led to us saying that they're highly likely to buy. They want to know, who should I call? when should I call them, what message should I message to them, what channel should I reach them to, what are their interests. So there are things that we use in our predictive model that predict that they're actually likely to buy, but that's not necessarily what the salesperson is going to engage the prospect with. So they may engage the prospect with, we know that your kid is into lacrosse, because that's something that they can make that human touch and that personal relationship. So there are different types of data, and I think it's really important that the tools that are going to be successful today aren't just using the data to make the predictions or give them insights, but it's actually allowing them to drive to take that next step forward. So there's everything from, when we look at the world of data, there's everything from just like static attribute data that you can go buy a bunch of company level information like the DMBs and the Compass Medias and the contact level names of the world like the data.coms and net prospects. But that's all just who your prospects are. What's really interesting in the world we live today, which is where you kind of go as well, is all this behavioral data. And so everything that we're doing, we're all walking around with supercomputers in our pocket. We are leaving a trace of exactly what we want and what we need and where we are in the buying process. And the technologies can sit on top of that and make the predictions, synthesize all this information, the static data as well as the behavioral data, to say, who is your right buyer? Are they a fit on your right buyer? And are they in market? And do they have a pain and a need to buy your products now? And so at the end of the day, from a sales and marketing perspective, that's what salespeople are looking for. They don't want to look at all the analytics. They don't want to see the backward data. They just want to know, who do I call and what do I say?
Well, I think, that's true, and it all sounds great, knowing exactly what you need to know when you want to know it. But so, I see these surveys and even talking to executives, they know that's important, and yet they feel like they're coming up short when it comes to using the data available to them. And what did you say, 1,800 vendors, marketing?
I think there's 1,800 marketing technology vendors.
So, you feel like, I could see where you'd be in a position thinking, well, if I pick one of these, I'm kind of going down a path, or I'm spending a lot of money, or I'm doing both. Before I even know, I don't have my ROI, before I know what's going to happen, what do I do?
I think one of the things that I really like about the term big data becoming popular and executives becoming familiar with it is, in order to get good results and be a really data-driven company, you really have to invest in it, right? My company is only about 65 people, and it's hard for me to get good data out. And it's actually not an activity that's like obviously ROI generating, right? The salespeople, they go and sell, I understand that, right? The engineers, they go out and they build stuff, I understand that. But the data team is actually bringing back information to help make good decisions, which is so important, right? It's so important, and it's gonna be one of these things that it's like the most important thing, but it's never the most urgent thing. And so if you're not actually investing in it, and I think one thing that I see companies do that's amazing, I love it, is hiring a chief data officer. Yeah. Is such a good trend where you have data like right at the executive level and it's like front and center all the time. And I think if you don't do that, like if you don't really invest in data and you're not prepared to spend on it, you're just not going to get good results and you're not going to be data driven. It's the first thing that goes when there's a budget cut.
Yeah. I actually counter that. I think that we need to think about those things that are measurable. Right, there are so many technologies, and put away all the ones that are giving you static data and you don't know how to analyze it and how to apply it to your business problem. And what is measurable? What can we actually measure and see the lift? And set those, think of it as a controlled experiment like you're going to do anything else in 6th grade, and measure that this is actually having an impact. And if you start to focus on those things, these other vendors, like what we're doing is we're buying 50 different data sources, so you don't have to, right? So there are technologies that are tying all the technologies together. We're sending the data out to your DMPs and to your personalization. So you don't have to necessarily do that. So don't think of it as, I need to solve this one pain. What's your end goal? Your end goal is to find and reach customers that have a need for the products you sell. Yeah. So try to tie back to what those technologies that can really measure that result, as opposed to being myopic and I'm solving this one small pain point.
So that's true. That's one thing that data solves. But I think to Lucas's point, look, if you think about data very broadly, across your entire organization, and you become industry agnostic for a second. As much as we criticize what's happened in the last 10 years, and it's easy to do that, and I'm one of those people, my business would not exist without access to all the data that these enterprises hold. And the key, and I was mentioning this to Lucas before we came on, the key is that the data has to be right. So I actually agree with the point that when you think about where an enterprise should put some kind of effort and investment, if you will, even emotional investment, is around data governance, around hiring people who essentially will ensure that the organization creates a single truth, right? The data has to be right. It doesn't have to be in a single database. It doesn't have to be a single source. But how many of you have walked into a meeting and you were going to talk about the performance of something, whether it was employees, whether it was a product, whether it was your sales team, and you had some numbers and somebody else at the meeting had different numbers, right? And it was something that's not difficult. You don't need data scientists to figure this stuff out. You actually just needed to pull the data out of a database, and it was different. That happens all the time, and that creates an enormous amount of inefficiency that has to get fixed over the next few years.
But that's still backward looking, so that's still yesterday. So we look back on data and analytics, like what we can do now is prescriptive and predictive and thinking about the
predictive
future.
requires good historical data.
You have to have good historical data, but it doesn't have to be 100. It depends what you're doing it for. If I'm predicting that there's going to be an outbreak of Ebola, then I need to be pretty much right? So if it has to do with healthcare and things like that. If it has to do with marketing and sales and I'm 85% right, it's a whole lot better than throwing a dart at a wall and never being right? Like going out there and spraying and praying, which is what we're doing today. So it really depends on the use case, that whether or not you have to be right. And I think people are focusing on this cleansing of data where you can actually take what you have now, put it into the engines, and the engines can actually, math can figure out what can actually drop out of that data and what's actually not. You don't have to cleanse it to perfection. And I think people are spending a lot have time trying to do that today.
Okay, I
know
have
that's
to
what
jump
your
in.
business does. I know that's what you do.
I was my background is I
Depends the use-
studied machine learning and predictive analytics, and what I really wanted to do is make it real. Like I really wanted business to use artificial intelligence, and what I found was actually the biggest factor in making predictive analytics work in the real world is the quality of the input data, which is why I started Crowdflower. I mean, I feel so passionate. I love your company. I think it's super cool.
And I love yours.
So I think that using predictive analytics in business is like such a good idea and so important and like definitely going to happen. But I think that if you're actually doing it, I think the best thing you could do is have clean input data. And even more simply, when you think about BI, it's like, would you rather have a mediocre analysis on good input data or an awesome analysis on mediocre data, right? It's like not even close.
And
Would you
by the
rather
way,
get results tomorrow or wait 6 months or a year to clean your data and get it right? And not that you still need to clean the data, it depends.
But everything is not sales and marketing. It's really not. And I think if you don't get this stuff right now, you start to build up a lot of debt. You start to build a culture in your organization that really tolerates, today it's 85% right. Maybe in a few years when we've got 100x the amount of data that we're dealing with today, it's 70%. We convince ourselves that that's still good. I think we're still getting things right. We're still laying the foundational infrastructure, and it's important that you spend time on stuff like this.
I mean, in some cases, going from a world where we were 1% right. So
Well,
for
that's
sales
true.
and marketing, they're converting at 1%. So when you go from 1% to 85%. So it really depends on the use case. And I mean, we're looking at using Crowdflower to cleanse data for company enrichment and contact enrichment. And there are cases where we don't want to see 5 different companies when they're actually the same company and they just have slightly different addresses put in. So there are places where cleansing is really important. But I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time getting focused on that, where that's not the business value at the end of the day.
Well, I think, certainly the use case is an important thing. We're just about out of time, but I'm wondering if you could just quickly give your best piece of data advice to the folks who have gathered here. What would you say in terms of big data and how to use it?
Clean your data.
Best piece of advice. You have to test new technologies. We live in an amazing world, and actually an analyst isn't a data scientist, and that we really should be thinking about how can I drive my business forward and tying it back to the business outcome. And then if you focus with that focus, then you can get real results.
I would just start with the business problem you're trying to solve and then go get the data you need to solve that problem, as opposed to trying to meter, monitor, tag, capture everything in the universe.
Well, great. Listen, I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot. I feel smarter, but that may not be your best data point.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.